Welcome back to Chords and Queens, the podcast dedicated to highlighting the work of women composers and musicians within classical music. And today I'm very excited to be joined by the founder of the Ina Boyle Society, Katie Rowan. And for a bit of background, the Ina Boyle Society is a charity dedicated to promoting the incredible music and legacy of Irish composer Ina Boyle, which the name might be familiar to you as we dedicated a whole podcast episode talking about her life and music. So if you want to listen to that, I will leave a link in the description. Created in 2020, the Ina Boyle Society aims to promote, educate, appreciate and unify Irish composers, rediscovering and celebrating Ireland's rich classical musical heritage, which is often underappreciated. The Society works closely with Irish and British cultural and academic organisations and aims to increase public awareness and recognition of Ina Boyle as one of Ireland's most important and prolific women composers of the early 20th century. Ina Boyle has a huge body of work, and although it's largely unperformed, it is preserved in manuscript form in the Library of Trinity College Dublin, awaiting rediscovery. So to talk about all of this, today we have the wonderful Katie Rowan joining us, who not only is the founder of the Ina Boyle Society, but actually related to Ina Boyle herself. So welcome, Katie, and thank you so much for your time today. I was wondering, to start with, if you wouldn't mind, could you talk a bit about yourself and your family ties to Ina, and what made you want to start the Ina Boyle Society in the first place?
Well, I've always loved music, and I studied music when I was a girl, and I'd always known about Ina. And though I never made a career, I'm not a professional musician. As I say, I've loved it all my life. And it was really, I was involved with Help Musicians UK, which is one of the major charity supporting musicians. And I suddenly thought of her. And then I knew people in Dublin, and I went over to Dublin for the first seminar on the Irish symphonies. So with regard to Ina, the actual family link is that my grandmother and Ina were first cousins, my grandmother Boyle. We never really knew her, though I think my mother met her. And so when I got involved with Help Musicians UK and got involved with music more when I retired, I thought of her. And that was when I went over to Dublin for the seminar, and I met everyone in Dublin who knew about Ina and had been, trying to promote her work. And most importantly, I met the marvelous Dr. Ina Boyle, Ina's great champion. And we got on so well, and we worked tirelessly together. And very sadly, she died last year. So that is really how I got involved and why I got involved. Apart from my love of music, the other thing was I felt a huge sense of privilege when I found some of Ina's music. The idea that I had a family connection with someone who could write music like this was amazing. And I felt, right, okay, this is my mission. I want her to get the recognition now and get the chance to be heard, which didn't work in her lifetime because of circumstances.
Absolutely.
So that is the seed of that developed and became in 2020 the Ina Boyle Society.
It's fantastic that you've done all this work to get her name out there. And then when you were growing up, you said you played music and studied music. Had you ever come across her music before, or had played a piece sort of accidentally?
No, I never did. And it was just, as I say, I really had forgotten all about her. I knew vaguely. But it was really when I retired and I thought, right, that's when I thought of her. And apart from the voyage of discovering Ina, it was also a discovery of Irish classical music and Irish performers and composers. It was wonderful. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful privilege for me. And I really had great fun, if testing at times.
And just on that subject as well, Ina grew up in Enniskerry, and I believe it was her father that introduced her to music. So can you talk a bit about her early life in music and what sparked her interest in playing and writing classical music?
Well, her father was a very keen amateur musician. He was a clergyman, and he took church on a Sunday and he made violins during the week. And he was Ina's first teacher. And then she went on to study with some teachers in Dublin. And there was a family connection with Charles Wood. And so it was through Charles Wood that she met and was introduced to Vaughan Williams. So that it was her father who really sparked everything off. And she lived a very close life, a very privileged life, if you like. She had a governess, but she and her sister, music was a big thing in their education right from the start.
Which is incredible. And something that really resonated with me was, sort of situation, like living with her family in a small village in Ireland, rather in a sort of major musical hub like a London or Vienna at the time. And it feels very relatable for many aspiring composers today who are also working from home and are outside of these sort of big musical cities. And one of my favorite works by Ina is her Symphony No. 1, Glen Cree. Do you think that her location helped shape her compositional voice?
Absolutely. In some ways, her isolation held her back because she wasn't in London or any of the major hubs. But the positive thing was that it's a very individual voice, and it's very Irish for me, because we're Irish too. And she would go and walk every day in the glorious countryside round her home. And as she walked, suddenly a melody, a composition would come into her head, and then she would go home and she would write it down. And then she would send it to Vaughan Williams for his comments, and then she would go over to see him. So I think the isolation was positive in that she is a very unique voice, and I think a very Irish voice, because you can really, for me, I hear Ireland whenever I listen to her.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so much of that influence in her work as well. And I think in my research of her, I read a lot about her isolation and constantly wondered if that was something that in her, did she feel like she was held back? And, but I think to your point as well, there's so much beauty in her being in Ireland and not in a big city where her own voice may have been dampened by that sort of, traditional city sound at the time, where I think she did have time to find that voice being, as we say, isolated, which is incredible. And I think I often joke that conversations about classical music tend to circle around the same big names, including Bach and Mozart and Schumann, and in England, especially Vaughan Williams, which you've mentioned. And what's fascinating is how often these figures had meaningful connections with women composers that we're what feels like only now beginning to talk about. And Ina Boyle was actually a student of Vaughan Williams, which is a great example of this. And what do we know about that relationship, and how did it influence her work?
Influenced her work very much. But I think she was also influenced by Charles Wood from a personal point of view and from a musical point of view. But I also think people said, well, was she held back? I think she was held back by circumstances, but she also loved the life she lived. She didn't want to change it. She had opportunities to go and study in London and elsewhere. Vaughan Williams really wanted this, but she didn't want it. A thing that interests me very much is what difference would it have made if she had gone and studied? If she had gone, she would be a very different person, I think, and a very different composer. And so I feel, in a way, that actually what we've got with Ina, and certainly it reaches me very much, is a unique person and a unique musical voice, because she actually heard very little music. She would listen on the radio. She would sometimes go to a concert in Dublin when she came over on a very regular basis, about 3 or 4 times a year to London to have lessons with Vaughan Williams. She would then go to concerts, but she actually heard very little. And so she wrote all this music that wasn't performed, but that didn't stop her. This is what she did. This is what she lived for. I find this really special, really, really special.
Yeah, I agree.
And she moved me very much.
Yeah, and even listening to it as well, there's something truly authentic and unique in her music as well, which I agree. I think that comes from her circumstances. But you touched on a really great point as well, which is something I wondered when I was researching her life? Was it her choice? And you've sort of answered that a little bit, going, she was happy where she was, and she loved her family, which is amazing to hear. But I think that's also important to the story as well, is going, she and you can tell me more about this, but she appears to have loved her situation, loved her family, and that brought her a great deal of sort of contentment. She wasn't seeking to live in London and chase this sort of composer dream at the time. But yeah, if you'd like to chat a little bit more about that being her choice, that would be great.
Well, Vaughan Williams wrote to her, and he said, I admire your continuing to compose. This was after the war, that because this held her back. Circumstance of the war, she was cut off in Ireland for 6 years. So the promise that she'd had before then, proms, whatever, all stopped. But she still kept composing every single day. And he said, I really admire your continuing to compose without encouragement. And she said in a letter back, I would have liked recognition, but I am content. And I think she was. I talked to Nicola Lofano, the wonderful composer, the daughter of Bessie McConaughey, and we've talked about this. And she lived this life that she wanted. And she lived a very spiritual, I feel her music is very spiritual. It's very much her. And she would compose, walk every day with her dogs. She'd go to church on a Sunday. Her faith was very important to her. She lived almost like an Anglican nun whose life was to compose. That was her purpose. And that's what I feel drove her. I wish I'd known her.
Yeah, oh, me too. And also to just talk about, I don't think she was lonely either, because when I was researching into her life, one of my favorite bits of information that I came across was that she was friends with other women composers, including Elizabeth Lutyens, Elizabeth McConkie, and Grace Williams. And I believe they organized a concert series together. But how important were these sort of female relationships to Ina? And was the support of other women pursuing composition encouraging to her?
I think it was. I think it was very much. I think through Vaughan Williams as a person, as her mentor, but actually the people she met and the other women she met, who he also mentored, was very important. But particularly important to her was her relationship and great friendship with Bessie McConaughey. And the other important person in her life was her current cousin, Doreen Boyle. Now, Doreen was a violinist in the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra and was very close. And they, I would say, were the two closest people really to her. And in fact, they were both her musical executors after she died. She appointed them as that. She trusted them. So I think they were the most important. But the importance of her meeting other women, I think, was also very important to her.
Especially at a time when, women were told that they couldn't be composers, or if they'd had written music, it sort of wasn't played as much and definitely wasn't encouraged from, a wider context. But it also appears that she had a really deep and meaningful connection with her family. And when they passed away, it said that she continued to compose every day. How important was music to who Ina was as a person?
It was everything. It was her whole reason for living. I truly believe that, because that's what she lived to do. And it was done very quietly. It was done terribly modestly, but also very determinedly. She was a very determined person. I mean, I know some people who knew her when they were young, and he said, meeting Miss Boyle, who was very reserved, and she drove this funny little car. But inside this reserve was this music was her. That's how she explained it. And all the emotion, that was her.
In 1917, Vaughan Williams wrote to Ina Boyle, I think it's most courageous of you to go on with so little recognition. The only thing to say is that it does sometimes come finally. Could you speak about the challenges she faced in trying to have her work heard, particularly as a woman composer? And would those challenges might have differed had she been a male Irish composer at the time?
It might have. But I think her main problems was her isolation.
Mhm.
and the war. The war cut her off for 6 years from London. So really the progress she'd made was lost. And though she was very determined, she kept submitting pieces to publishers. She did get some more, there are some published, and she was very determined in that way. But because she wasn't in London, and things had changed a lot. So I think that I would say in part, yes, because all women were affected by, it was male composers, number one, but not exclusively so. Well, that is my feeling.
Even, do you know much about how she sort of fared on those journeys as well? Because that was something that was really surprising when I was reading about it. Is here's this sort of, I believe she was on her own, traveling from Ireland to London and back. Is there anything you could say about that? Because that was sort of a crazy story for me when I was reading it.
Well, the thing, she was she could be seen as an eccentric. You could call her an eccentric. She would travel over on the packet boat from Dunleary, and she would be in her old coat. She would be carrying her scores in her pocket that she was going to discuss with Vaughan Williams. And she was quite intrepid. She did it every time. Now, she did have some friends in London. I mean, there was great friend McConaughey, but in the main, she was quite intrepid in her way and quite determined. This is how she had to get there. This is what she was doing.
Yeah, which definitely feels ahead of her time as well. Like I can't imagine being of her age as well, and especially as the war's going on. That must have been,
Yeah.
you'd think very scary. But I think I'm learning more about her. Like you said, that she's this determined, kind of going along with the beat of her own drum kind of person, which I think is so inspiring. Not only to me, but I'm sure many composers listening as well. And I noticed that on your website you talk about not only promoting Ina's music, but the work of other Irish composers, especially women. Do you have any composer recommendations and people we need to be listening to, whether that be past or present composers?
All our focus so far has been on Ina. So we are now moving on to the next stage, which is developing, knowledge, particularly about composers of her generation. But also there is a new generation of women composers coming up. And this is going to be a new stage for us to move to. And an important person, I think, and very good to compare with Ina and somebody of her generation was Joan Trimble. Now, Joan, she was a lecturer at RCM, and she was a successful composer. And then her father died. So she had to return to Belfast to run the family newspaper. And she had a family. And that meant that her output as a composer went right down. Now, Ina, in comparison, composing was all she did. She did nothing else. And that is why you have this huge output. So what I'm very pleased about is that Joan Trimble now is getting more recognition, more performances. And so the next stage of the work of the Ina Boyle Society is developing opportunities for Irish women composers, past and present. So, and we now have which is wonderful, because I am stepping down, I'm 80 now, and I feel it's right for me to hand over to the young generation. And I'm very pleased that Michael Boyle, who is like me, a relative of Ina, but he's also a composer, a young composer.
Oh.
And he is the new leader of Ina Boyle Society. And he is wonderful. And it's just a wonderful sense of pattern that it's the new generation of the Boyle family is a composer and is going to be taking Ina and other Irish women composers forward.
Which is incredible. And definitely music very much runs in your family.
It does.
And
it does.
My gateway and discovery of Ina's music actually came from listening to Esther Abrami's album called Woman, featuring Ina's concerto for violin and orchestra. What role do performers play in shaping Ina Boyle's legacy today? And how does the society support or guide them?
At the moment, the real issue is access to the music. And this is complicated. because all the music, as we've said, is in the library of Trinity College in manuscript form. So therefore, as Ina, our work raised her profile, so we began to get more requests from performers, but there weren't editions to give people. And so this was a real challenge to actually enable the requests we'd got from performers, but it needed editions. So this was a challenge. And it was also a challenge financially, because we've very little money. We don't very much now. So this was the real challenge. But I'm all being well and a fair wind. We are discussing with the family and a major publishing company the possibility of publishing all of Ina's music. Now, if this comes off, fingers crossed, this is going to open up all Ina's music too. But I can't, we all keep our fingers crossed and that this will work, because it's going to change everything. But our main work has been dealing with all those who wanted to perform her, and increasingly copyright, dealing with the copyright issues. Well, that's where the challenges were. But all those have been resolved now and moving forward in a way to be honest, when I started, I couldn't have imagined. I couldn't have imagined. And, when one thinks of Ina on her own, working on her own, and now it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been marvelous for me, and I may be digressing, is to see the reactions of people to Ina's music for the first time. I will always remember when it was the first CD, of the orchestral CD, which was recorded by the BBC Concert Orchestra, conducted by Ronald Corb, who was a trustee and sadly died last year. And I can remember Ita came over from Ireland and I was there, and we sat down and the orchestra started. But as the morning went on, you could feel a change in the atmosphere. And by coffee time, everybody was coming to us and saying, this woman is fantastic. We must get more of her music. We must. And that has been the reaction of everybody almost who has come into contact. So the problem has not been, and the challenge, I wouldn't say, the challenges have not been for performers wanting to perform her, but it was actually the mechanics of the challenges with regard to the availability of editions that people could choose and dealing with the copyright.
Yeah.
But I say, touch wood, all of those now have been resolved.
Yes.
And that means that Ina Boyle Society can move to actually start promoting other women composers, Irish women composers, and opening up opportunities. Now, Michael has great plans. He's a super young man. So it's a case of watch this space. Is bursaries. Composers need bursaries. They need time to compose. So many are trying to earn a crust and trying to grab time, to compose in between. They need time. So bursaries are important. So there are great plans, but we've got to have the sponsors and the support. So I would say the wonderful work and the response of performers, broadcasters, recordings, fantastic. But we've got to push the machinery, and that is beginning to happen.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on such a larger issue as well, and that's about access. And I think that does come from musical institutions, whether that be schools and primary schools and secondary schools, universities. And what I think is so remarkable about Ina's work is not only do we have a fantastically talented composer, but we have access to her music, which can't always be said for, women composers. A lot of their work gets lost or, was never published. So we've lost so much of it. And I think that's what's incredible going forward, is the Ina Boyle Society's desire to provide access to people, whether that be new students or, virtuosic performers. I'm very excited about what's to come. And then for the people listening to this, whether they're musicians, non-musicians, composers, students, or people who just like listening to classical music. What is the best way for all of these sort of people involved, musicians, scholars, or listeners, to support the continued revival of Ina Boyle's music? So how can we help?
Well, listen to the music, perform it, and listen to it and love it. And can I just say, now, for example, there's a new CD coming out with the Piatti Quartet, and there is, which is very exciting. But we need a bit of money to support new projects and support new ways forward. You mentioned something that I think was very important, and that is colleges and education and music education. Now, we've got Ina on the Irish music curriculum. We want to get Ina and other Irish composers, women composers, on the music curriculums. That is really important.
I agree. And yeah, my own personal story with that is, I grew up studying music and never once heard that a woman composer's name ever in my time studying music at school. So I think it's so important, even if you're in an Irish school or just any school in the UK, to have someone that's this phenomenally talented woman that's, like you said, so determined and has all of these incredible qualities paired with her incredible talent. I think it's so important to tell these stories, and that's how Ina Boyle's legacy lives on and her music live on, is through the future musicians of the world and the people who want to listen to it. And just finally, I guess, is there a particular anecdote or small story about Ina Boyle that you often wish more people knew?
Well, there's one which means a very, very great deal to me, and I feel really encapsulates Ina as a person. She died in 1967, and she wrote to her great friend, Elizabeth McConaughey, and said, "They've diagnosed me with cancer. It's not very good." And in the next line, she said, "But I have found this poem and I've started to set it to music." Wow. She never lived to finish it. Oh. But I feel that said everything about Ina.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
And what her music meant to her.
I think it was part of her soul. It wasn't just, a hobby or, something that she did to pass the time. For Ina, it definitely seemed like it was literally who she was as a person. She lived and breathed music, which I think is so inspiring to me. But I think you hear that in her music. Like I was listening to her music last night at the gym and was just thinking like, what this woman put pen to paper and put these notes together in such a unique and whimsical and delightful way. And I think it doesn't matter what you listen to. If you listen to Ina Boyle's music, I guarantee you'll fall in love with it. There's just so much passion in it, and I think that's because of who she is. She was so entwined with music. She understood it like very few of us do as well. So I'm very excited to have got to know her and research her, and I'm so glad for your society as well, providing all of that information. And finally, our sort of last question, and just for fun, do you have a favourite piece of music written by Ina?
Now this is because I thought about this, it's very difficult. The majority of it, we don't know it. We haven't heard it yet because Ina never heard the majority of it. She never heard. So we've never heard. But for me, I love vocal music. I love the human voice. And Ina wrote about 70 songs. Now, we managed to do the songbook. And the purpose, it was a dream of mine to get the songs out so that people could, and these are available, to buy, and to get the songs so that people could sing them. And so there was the song CD, and then we have the performance at the Wigmore on the 10th of March, which will be Ina. It's called Discovering Ina Boyle, and it will also include music songs by the most important people in her life: Charles Wood, RVW, of course, and her great friend Betty McConaughey, and look at that holistic way. And for me, one of the things that I really love is Ina as a person. There's been a book about Ina. We talk about her compositions. We talk about her as a composer. But what about her as a person? What was it that drove her? What is it that inspired her? What did she really think? What did she really feel? She lived on alone. Yeah. And somebody said to me, "Katie, there's a book in this." And I think understanding not just Ina, but other composers
Mm,
as people,
yeah.
as people, and why they do the things they do, and how these wonderful music that they, how it happens, why it happens. You know, this is something I'm very keen on. So who knows?
No, I'm totally with you with that as well. And I think that's what's so important to me anyway about talking about women composers and talking to people like you who are related and probably have so many stories or anecdotes about her life from your family that you can share with us, because I'm definitely in that camp. It's like I just want to know more about how these women lived. And I think it's something
Yeah,
that's so sad because, we have the names of women composers, but we don't always have their life stories. We have
no,
few of their bits of music, where they have been published, but very little is known about them. So my determination going forward is like I just want to non-stop talk about these women until
well,
the
it's
people are sick of them.
wonderful.
Yeah, but yeah,
It's wonderful for me, Jennifer. It's wonderful for me because I just think of other women composers that we know and those we don't know, but from different countries,
yeah, of
you know,
course.
from different countries, from different circumstances.
Mm,
You know, I think, there have been some books already, but as people, you know, of why they did. I mean, being held back by being a woman, certainly of her generation, was absolutely central,
yeah,
but not altogether. There are all sorts of complex things in their lives going on and comparisons. So I think what you're doing with your blog and what we're talking about, I find very inspiring, and it's lovely to talk to you. I can't tell you.
well, right back at you. I think it's been incredible. And, just as we're about to wrap up this episode, I definitely recommend the audience listening to this to research about Ina Boyle. You've got the Ina Boyle Society website for sort of all the information, and Instagram as well. You guys are over on there, which is something I really like seeing a post from just Ina Boyle's face sort of cropping up on my Instagram. And then also there's this fantastic book, like you said in the beginning, by Dr. Ita Busan called Ina
Yes,
Boyle, A Composer's Life. So if you want to
yes,
know about Ina Boyle, please, there's so much out there and there's so much to come from what it sounds like as well that I'm super happy about. So with
yes.
that, thank you so much for your time, Katie. It's been an absolute pleasure. Is there any last things you would like to say? If not, I'm very happy to wrap up this episode.
Well, it's just to thank you and to thank everybody listening.
Yeah.
And but don't just listen to Ina. Yes, please listen to Ina, but think of all the other women composers there to be discovered. And I feel that Ina and the work we did, we spearheaded a way through, and we want others to come through too. And that's where dear Michael and his colleagues on the trustee board, I'll be supporting as president, so I'm not going away,
Mm.
but they're going to get on with the work, and is to really stand and support what Michael and team are want to do. And we do need money because
Absolutely.
we've done everything. Sorry, but we
No,
do
no,
because
it's
we need
because
money.
it's
Because
so
at the end of the day, do you know, all this has been done on a shoestring,
mm,
on
which
a
is
shoestring,
incredible as well because
a
there's
shoestring.
you
And,
know
and I'll finish with one last thing.
Mhm.
Talking to someone, this has been, I like to think I'm a piece of Ina's jigsaw. We're all pieces, and the pieces all came together, and they've driven her forward. And it's her time, but we're not just doing for Ina. She's important, and that she reaches where she belongs, and she's moving that way. But we do it for others, and we spearhead the way through for other Irish women composers,
yeah,
but not just Irish women. Can I say that?
yeah.
In my view, you
But
know,
beautifully
but
said as
that's
well.
me. That's me. That's me.
Beautifully
That's
said
me.
as well. But yeah, I definitely support the point as, we need to support these women, not only financially, but just with support as well. I think, the
Yeah,
more eyes you have on you, the more opportunities that can present themselves. So even if it's
exactly.
giving a follow onto the Instagram and, having a look at her website, supporting the book as well. encourage libraries to take hold of it, things like that, get it in schools. So, I think we're all more powerful than we think we are as well. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been absolutely lovely to talk to you. I'm so thrilled for this. Thank you so much, Katie. And
Well, it's lovely meeting you. I'm delighted. It's really wonderful for me. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
no worries at all. Thank you for you. And with that, we'll say goodbye and see you next week for another, hopefully, as amazing episode as well.